hear me?
Can you hear me now?
There you go. Perfect.
Okay.
That was a little muffled at the beginning.
Yeah, I was trying to get it to connect to my headphones.
Oh, yeah. This is a new thing for me too. This is, I think you're probably the fifth phone call I've done. I usually do it all in person, but can't turn down the Bassmaster,
Yeah, I was good with, that's why I was wondering if we're doing video or audio or.
Yeah, I mean, I started with audio the first probably 105 episodes, 100 episodes. Yeah. And then I started right before COVID. I was doing a lot of live in-person ones, and then COVID hit, and I said, I got to do call-ins. So I think the first one I did was Bill Semental. So and I'm like, it makes sense. I can't get to Idaho, dude. Yeah. I mean, true. I've drove to Arizona. I'm going up north to do Paul Bailey and some of the swim bait guys up there, but it's, my family lives in Twin Falls. I don't know how far that is from you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm still 8 hours north of Twin Falls.
Yeah, that's a mission and a half, dude. But well, thanks for coming on the podcast, dude. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Yeah, and I think you're the most established tournament fisherman on this podcast ever.
Heck yeah. I'll take it.
I got a lot of questions for you. I guess the first one I want to talk about is your YouTube channel. I've been watching that lately. Yeah. How much work goes into that thing, dude?
Oh man, it is. It's a love-hate relationship for lots and lots of reasons. I absolutely love it because I think it gets to show a different perspective than what most people see. Mm-hmm. And I also think that the majority of the YouTube demographic is not necessarily your hardcore tournament guys. Now that line is blending and meshing more and more every year, but there's definitely a big difference between the hardcore YouTube crowd and the hardcore tournament crowd. And you're starting to see that mix, but it's because you've got tournament guys doing YouTube channels and you've got some YouTube guys that are getting into tournaments. And so you start to have that crossover. It takes just a lot of work logistically. It takes a lot of money to do it.
Yeah.
And then I think one of our biggest hiccups, or one of the things that faults us the most, is the level of quality that we try to keep in them. And to do that, you can't crank them out as quickly as YouTube's algorithm would like you to.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I've had to kind of take a step back and look at it and say, okay, what's the overall goal here? And, is it just gaining more subscribers, or is it actually telling the story that we want to tell it and how it unfolds and making it look good? And that's what it came down to. Right? I was not doing it necessarily for the money or for the subscribers or the likes or comments or any of that. It was just to be able to inspire people and let them see what it actually looks like out there on the water.
Do you feel like that's almost like your attitude? You want to do the best you can. You want to be the best in the best series you can, whatever. So you want to put out the best product you can. So if you're going to put out video, you want it to be the best mm-hmm. quality as possible, right?
100%. Yeah. What I learned about myself early on is that I am not a good salesman. I'm not a good. Let me rephrase that. I'm not a good used car salesman. I can't look somebody in the eyes and just tell them what they want to hear. And that authenticity is very important for me. And so when I put something out, if in my heart I feel like that's the best that we can do, then I don't feel like I'm ever selling anybody to something, right? I'm just informing them of what I believe in, the products I use or whatever it may be. And then I never have to feel like I'm selling something, because it's a weird, awkward feeling for me.
Yeah. Did you try to bring the production down at all? And like during when you started the video, because you have a lot of subscribers, right, on YouTube?
I mean, it's okay. We just broke 45,000.
That's a lot. That's great.
And so I feel good about it. I think we could be a lot higher if we push more videos. Like, I can see if we're posting fairly consistently. Like this fall, we had a lot of tournaments back to back to back, and as we were posting more frequently, that snowball was rolling at a faster speed and getting bigger.
Yeah.
And but staying on top of that is hard, because the YouTube gig is not my full-time thing. The tournament side of it and the sponsorships and that, the business side of it on that end, is the full-time thing, and that funds the YouTube. And so for me, he's one of my best friends, Kyle, is the one that's been filming for me. And we've had a lot of talks about that, as like, do we just try to crank them out quicker? And we'll have hour-long conversations about it, and it always circles back to, that's not who we are. And so we're not going to do it as far as not on the tournament series. Now, if it's like other videos, kind of just one-off stuff and things like that, then we're not as worried about it. But that, as far as like BMP fishing, the series, I want that to be similar to something that people would watch as a series on Netflix or Hulu or something.
And I think what you're doing too is great, because one debate I've had on my podcast with people, I've had it with lots of people, is what do you consider a professional fisherman, angler?
It's tough.
And to me, I consider the best person at what they do. So to me, you're a professional. Now, some people would consider a professional fisherman a guide, or someone that makes money off of YouTube, like Guggen Squad, or I'm not hating anyone, but they do it for a living. They make a lot of money. And with that, you get companies probably wanting to put money into people and take it out of the tournament anglers' hands, almost, because you have YouTube fishermen that are kind of like have these channels with millions, followers, stuff like that. So it's cool that you're trying to go, hey, I got to get with the times. I got to make sure I'm putting out the best I can to keep up with these guys and put this production out. And you pretty much have a full-time film guy with you, right? I mean, your buddy. Is he with you a lot of the time? I mean,
we actually went to high school together. He graduated. Awesome. He graduated a couple years younger than me, actually, with my sister. And it's funny, like, we didn't hang out a lot in high school. We had kind of the same group of friends, and we played some sports together. But we've actually became better friends outside of high school. And then, he didn't know anything about tournament fishing, and I just threw him in a bass boat with a camera the first time that he filmed a couple years ago, and he crushed it. And so, as he learned more about it, he got into fishing. Now he's addicted to fishing, and it just makes it so easy, because he stays in our RV with us, and him and Tiff get along great. And
that's great.
It's definitely a team / family atmosphere. And I think a lot of people can see that throughout the videos, right? Like, he's not just behind the camera. Sometimes he'll be in front of the camera, and, we keep it lighthearted and enjoyable. And, that conversation of who's considered a professional comes up all the time. And for me, it's like, if a professional angler is really just at the top level, right?
Yeah.
The elite series,
like basketball. To me, like, I compared it to like Michael Jordan or someone that's a professional basketball player. I mean, you get a guy that can do these crazy dunks. He's still not a pro, but he could be making as much as them. But like you're saying, is I agree, elite series, something like that.
Yeah. Like, for me, I wouldn't consider the Globetrotters professional basketball players. Yeah. They're professional entertainers.
Yes.
That are really good at basketball.
Yes.
You know, and it's the same thing with YouTube. Like, they're not necessarily professional anglers. They may make a living off of, you know, fishing content, but it's not a professional angler. But when you circle it back around from a company standpoint, and it becomes marketing dollars and impressions and eyeballs, you know, those big numbers that some of those groups have catch the eyeballs of those companies because they can move products. But then you also have it. It doesn't work for every company.
Mm-mm.
Because you also have to be wise enough to look at that demographic and understand, like, does that network fit what that company is trying to sell?
That's almost like picking the correct sponsor for you, right? Like
100%.
you can't, have you ever had someone offer you, have you ever sold your soul for money or thought about it and been like, damn, that's a lot of money, but you just can't back it, you know, like you're like, I just can't do it. You ever been on the line with a sponsor like that?
I've done some deals where that didn't turn out like I thought they were going to.
Uh-huh.
But I've had way more deals that that I've just walked away from. You know, and some pretty big paying deals that were not the right fit for me, and I just walk away from the money.
Yeah.
It's not, to me, it's not worth it. You sell yourself once, you sell yourself forever. And I'm just not, like, I'm in it for the long game, and there's not enough upside. Like, I'm not going to take the money to my grave. So,
well, I feel like
keep your money.
Even you, like, you know, switching back from the elite, you know, back and forth, that was a big deal. I mean, that was like, were you almost like, so when you did that, you know, I read a little article about it on the magazine, and that feeling must be pretty crazy to, like, okay, you almost got to feel like it's a business a little bit too. So maybe like in your mind, you had like a business minded decision that just, you know, your heart didn't feel that way kind of thing.
Yeah, that was a very, like, soul searching. I mean, you'd say a couple years, I guess, because it was really weird. Like, there was part of me that I could feel that was saying, don't leave, don't go do that. And then, like, that was like my heart, right? My brain saying, how could you not go? Like, everyone else says they're going, and, like, how could you get it wrong, you know, and want to stay? And, you know, like, that was kind of one of those things where it didn't evolve into what I thought it was going to, and kind of started to go a different direction. And the more it did that, the more my heart pulled me back to where I originally was.
Did you
pull me back to the elite?
Yeah.
And so in that moment, or like through that process, things started to feel more like a job. I didn't have the same passion. I still enjoyed it, right? Like, I still had a blast, and there was a lot of things that I learned from it and a lot of things that I loved about it. And if I could go back, I would not do it any differently, because I did learn so much about myself and the whole process of it. So I don't regret any of it. But I think what I realized the most is that in that process, I had to do it for the right reasons. And for me, it was for the passion. And I had to have that, like, burning desire to compete and win, and, you know, to make that next cast. And I felt that slipping, and it scared me. And I was like, I can't do this. I was like, I'm way too young, and I'm not going to be one of those guys that gets burnt out. And I had to make a decision that, you know, eventually I finally realized what was happening internally with me, of this, like, tug of war of back and forth of what the right call was. And at the end of the day, I just had to do what I felt like made me the most happy.
Did you feel like it turned into more of a job due to the format? Do you know what I'm saying? Like when you went over there, or are you either way, you're happy with either format?
Somewhat. There's pros and cons to both formats.
Yeah.
It's the easiest way to say. I mean, they're not the same, and so they're really hard to compare to each other. Because there's definitely things I like about it. For me, I like the lack of fan interaction was tough for me.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't the build up, right? So there were really cool moments in it, but you didn't have those winning moments, right? Like, to me, one of the most important moments in bass fishing is when a guy wins and his weight is announced on stage. Because there's all of this suspense, and even if a guy blows it away on the last day, it's still not official until that moment. And so an entire week's worth, or even more than a week's worth, a year, several years, a guy's lifetime to that moment of winning one of those events, something you've dreamt of since you were a kid. And a lot of those dreams come about because you've seen that moment, right? You've watched that moment on TV, you've watched it online. All of these emotions that a guy has. And I just felt like a lot of that emotion was pulled out of it. Now, it was intense. It was super competitive because you were always on the time clock. You knew what everybody had. You really couldn't make a wrong decision because it was going to cost you. It was too hard to come back from. But at the end of the day, it was like I was going out there, getting the job done, and I would be pumped when I did well. But it was like I was just going out there and I was doing my job because I'm competitive and I don't want to lose.
Yeah.
I didn't have the same passion for it.
Did you play high school sports?
I did. I wrestled all the way from 8 all the way into college.
So do you think that plays a factor in, like, you want to be the center stage? Because, like, wrestling, you know, that's a big deal when you win. You got a lot of people watching you, so you're, like, used to that excitement, right?
For me, it's kind of, just to, like, bring it to simple terms, it's like the saying, does a tree make a sound if it falls in the woods and nobody's around?
Yeah.
It's kind of that same thing for me, right? It's like the things that we experience in life are amplified by who we experience them with.
Yeah.
And so when you win an event and there's nobody around, it's really cool, but you don't have that energy, right? Like, we're social creatures by nature. That's what human beings are. And so I feed off of that energy. Like, there's some guys that don't like people being out there on the water watching them fish. I love it. I love having people around watching, as long as they're respectful, right? And they're not running over everything and fishing everything behind you and stuff. But, like, just having good spectators and people out there just fuels that fire and that energy for me. And it's the same on stage. And it amplifies those moments. And that's why I wanted to start fishing for a living. I mean, and that's what keeps me going is those little moments and those feelings, because the only way to experience that is for it to happen again.
Yeah. That makes complete sense. Since you did come from, like, a wrestling background, you might understand this question a little. Since you have two different platforms, how do you know who the best is? You know what I'm saying? When you're fishing, if you're fishing, are you fishing to beat your personal best or to be the best? You know what I'm saying? And if you are the best in the elite, who's to say that someone in the Bass Tour is not better?
Oh, that's a good question. Honestly, the only thing you can do in fishing is be better than you were yesterday. And as long as you focus on that, you'll continually progress forward. And like the thing with fishing is that there's so many variables, and it's ever changing, that you can be the best one week and then you're literally the very next week. You can win on Sunday, and on Monday morning when you wake up, you are just as good as the guy you launched next to.
Yeah, yeah.
And no better. And so to say that you are better than another guy is, you just can't. You know, some guys may be more knowledgeable at certain techniques, certain bodies of water, or certain types of bodies of water, but there's really not a way to say like that guy's the best. Now you can look at guys like Kevin Van Dam, who over time has proven again and again that he is one of, if not the best professional anglers that we've ever had.
Yeah.
Just because
track record, right?
The numbers don't, the numbers don't lie. And over time, right? Like, he's not lucky that many times. He's that good. I mean, he has taken all of the luck out of it. I mean, he has proved himself. And same with guys like Rick Clunn. Right? Clunn was winning classics before I was alive, and has continued to win Elite Series events while I've been a professional angler, while I've fished on the Elite Series. And so, there's just some guys that will do that. And you can't really say like that one is.
Yeah. Like there's not other. Exactly. No, that's a great answer, man. 100%. So at the same time, say you're doing really good and you want to become a professional angler. What do you think it really takes? Like, cause you see a lot of guys try to do it, and I'm sure it's very expensive. So how do you go about like even thinking about doing that? Maybe a younger guy, maybe giving him a little bit of advice and going, hey, you got to have these ducks in a row first before you even think about it. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, I'll just start with the money side of it. Mm-hmm. I'm a firm believer in the fact that if it's meant to be and you're willing to put in the work, that the money side of it will take care of itself. Because myself included, a lot of the guys I know that make a living at it now didn't have a bunch of money when they started. Didn't come from a bunch of money.
Which is a great thing to hear. Because that's kind of what I wanted to say too, is like, do you need to have a lot of money to do this? Like, you need to come from money, or can you just be a really good angler and actually do it? If
you're good enough and you're willing to put in the work and make the right sacrifices, you can make it without the money. Mm-hmm. It will take care of itself. A guy that is a great example of that is Matt Robertson. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't come from a bunch of money. He's just like a good old boy from the country, but he's a phenomenal fisherman. And funny story about that, me and Matt Robertson, if some of the people don't know who Matt is, Matt he's qualified for the Classic in the weekend series last year, 2 years ago, mm-hmm. I believe. And then he won an Open this year, right after he finished second the week before, and qualified for the Elite Series this year.
Wow.
So people don't know who he is. But the funny thing is, me and Matt, randomly, so I was 18, kid from Idaho. I don't remember exactly how old Matt was, but we were roommates at a FLW federation, so the TBS National Championship in 2008.
Oh, wow.
We had both qualified for that event. And like, that's just an example of if guys that are consistently good and kind of work their way toward the top, there's a lot of guys that are good enough to do it that aren't willing to sacrifice the comfort of like a good job, a steady job, a nice house, like a nice truck, relationships. I mean, there's a lot of things you have to sacrifice. And so with the influx of high school and college kids and everything that we have now, the reality of it is 90% of them will not make it to the top level. But there will be a group of them that physically and mentally can't live without it that will make it happen. And then you just have to have you have to have a natural talent. Like there has to be that ability there, but you can't make it just on that. It's too demanding. It's too time consuming to make it just on talent. You can qualify just on talent, but you won't sustain just on talent.
Mm-hmm. That's a great answer. Did you ever get to the point like where you're like, man, like say like a horrible tournament, like where you had it all in the bag and you just blew it and maybe turned you off?
What do you mean turned me off?
So maybe like something that like really maybe like make you want to quit ever. You know what I'm saying?
I don't know. I don't think I never had moments that I was like, I'm not chasing this. So when I was 8 years old, I decided I wanted to fish for a living. And I knew there was something inside of me that wanted to do it so badly that pretty much all of my life decisions were made off of that why of like, how, if I do this or if I do that, how is it going to affect me making it fishing down the road? And my entire life was geared that way. And I always constantly made decisions. There were several times that like I didn't have enough money and I didn't know where to go. Remember one time I was driving back home and I had to fuel up for fuel and literally did not have any money in my bank account. $0 in my bank account, and I'm just sitting at the gas station and had to sleep at the gas station and wait until a check showed up at my house so that my mom could go deposit it in the bank so that I could drive. And I just slept in the back of my truck on the side of the road until the bank opened up the next day. And so, but like even in those moments, it was like I just knew that was part of it. And I think all of those moments make me appreciate it so much more now.
And it's a reality check as well, right? I mean,
yeah,
some people think it's all glamour and, cameras and stuff. And it's like, no, you're grinding in a truck, sleeping, eating AM, PM hamburgers and shit like that. Right.
Yeah. Whatever it took. I would go to McDonald's. This is so nasty. I would go to McDonald's and I would buy like 10 or 15 $1 cheeseburgers. And then I would just throw ice in the boat cooler and I would just throw them on ice. And that's what I lived off of for like 4 or 5 days. I just pull one out and just eat it, like breakfast, lunch, dinner, whatever. Just I kept them cold on ice, and I just pull them out and eat them. And I used to make tomato soup out of hot water and ketchup packets.
Oh my God, that's disgusting. Now, what happens if you had to shit? You ever crap your pants on the boat?
No, thankfully I've been blessed with like pretty solid bowels, and I'm able to sustain.
Because I couldn't imagine, like, man, you're fishing, dude, and you're out there eating all those hamburgers. Those would go right through me, dude.
No, I think they probably blocked me up more than anything.
Oh man, we have a big swim bait following. I guess a big for what we have, the listenership. And Mike Gilbert kind of pushed me your way and said you're pretty interested in that, and you put some work in with the swim bait. When did you pick that up, and when was that? You know, it seems like you have a love for it. When did you pick up the swim bait and kind of start fiddling with different baits?
I joke with people all the time and tell them I make a living fishing tournaments, and my hobby is throwing swim bait. So and for everybody that's done it knows like how addicting that is, because this just the things that you see with a big bait, you don't see with anything else.
Yeah,
like I've had fish literally run their head right into the trolling motor because you've got them in that trance, right? Like they don't. It's like the rest of the world doesn't exist, and they're tracking that bait and they're tracking it, and you know conditions suck and they're not going to eat it, and they just follow it, but they're so tuned in they run into the trolling motor. That kind of stuff is like that's what got me hooked, and I think I started when I was like 14, maybe.
Wow.
So like almost 20 years ago, 19 years ago.
Okay.
I started messing around, and because I'm fairly close to California, like I got that influx of things, you know, and you'd hear things through the grapevine, and then a lot of the people probably know like Bait Smith that was around.
Mm-hmm.
Bait Smith started from guys that were in the club that I fished in.
Oh, no way.
And yeah. And so early on, like they would give me like, you know, little prototype deals or things that they were working on. And so I was always like, that's kind of where I first got fascinated by it. And then just as the entire swim bait thing kind of evolved, like we started doing more and more of it, and started getting into the glide baits and the wake baits and, you know, triple trap and all of that stuff. You know, the biggest bass I've ever caught, I caught on an 8-inch Hud.
Oh, nice.
Like, I mean, so
how big was that bass?
12.4.
Oh, nice.
You know, it was pretty awesome. I thought it was a 13. It was in Texas. I thought it was a share lunker. It's up on my YouTube channel, Cast to Catch.
Yeah.
It's pretty dang. It's just so addicting. I mean, there's nothing like that. And you know, like you mentioned, Mike Gilbert. He's always one of those guys that I've been fascinated watching because he has a different approach to it. And I think that one thing that I was always drawn to also in the swim bait world is that in the big bait scheme of things, there's probably the biggest mesh of culture and fishing versus anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that comes because it's a lot of the Western influence to it. But it's funny, like if there's a kid that loves skateboarding or snowboarding or whatever it may be, BMX, something,
mm-hmm.
like some extreme sport, and then they get into fishing, they fall in love with big bait. So, they can care less about really like fishing tournaments and stuff a lot, right? Like they just want that one big one.
Yeah, that's like I guess it's an extreme fishing, right? Would be, I guess, big extreme sports is like a swim bait fishing.
Yeah, and I've always been fascinated by that mesh of different cultures, kind of, right? Because I grew up looking at fishing, and everybody, when they're like, "Oh, what do you want to do for a living?" and you say, "I want to be a professional bass fisherman." They're like, "Oh, don't you just like sit on a dock with a bobber and like wait for something to come bite?" And that drove me nuts. And I always saw like that swim bait world of, you know, progressing that and meshing that. I remember watching like Big Bait Posse
mm-hmm.
with Sean Bailey and those guys. And when that came out, I was like, this is what bass fishing should look like. I was like, this is the coolest stuff ever, right? It was like younger music, like guys driving these fast boats, like this is all these badass shots of giants eating swim baits. I'm like, yep.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. So you did a little research and kind of got in on your own swim bait as well, correct? The
I did.
Storm?
So just
Yeah.
over, yeah, I had worked with Storm pretty much since the time that that I qualified for the Elite Series. It was after my first Classic. They contacted me, and I got in with that group. And as things progressed, they're like, "What do you think about working on making a big bait?" I was like, "Yes, please." Um, and because really, there were a lot of different baits that I liked, but I struggled finding one that could lend itself to all the things I wanted it to be able to do in more of a tournament situation. So the Arashi Glide is really, it's geared towards tournament fishing. Not to say that it doesn't catch giants, but when you have a 7.5-inch bait, I consider that more into the tournament side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're a tournament guy, you look at that and you're like, that is a giant bait. There's no way a bass is going to bite that. But in the big bait world, that's not that big. And I think the biggest one I've caught on it so far is 9.5. I know several guys that have caught 10s and 11s on it.
Wow.
But you start talking 13, 14, 15, 16-pound fish. One, there's not as many of those anymore, but just, it's like the bigger you go, the more you up your odds of that one bite, even though you may go days without it. And so, I'm not afraid to say, like, I took inspiration from a lot of my favorite baits and just tried to mold them into one. And I learned a lot in the process of doing that, because when I started writing a list down of things I wanted it to do, and then when we started actually working on building that, it came down to the fact that the majority of those things, right? Like, if you want a really wide glide, but then you also want to be able to twitch that bait in and around cover, well, those two things essentially work against each other. They're like polar opposites when you talk about designing the bait. And it took a long time of, body shapes and weighting and things to get one where I felt like it might not be the best at a wide glide. It may not be the best at twitching, but it is the best at doing all of those things. And it does all of those things phenomenally, where I feel like I can catch fish on it anywhere across the country. So there was a lot of like Negotiator and Depth 250, and even some of like those Sneaky Pete, that like different stuff, like even like a Mother, because a Mother, even though it's made by Roman made, it doesn't fish the same as the Negotiator.
Yeah.
And I kind of pulled all of these little intricate things that I liked about all these different baits. Even some like handmade ones that I'd seen over the years of guys that don't even sell them, and try to take all those things I loved and put them into one.
So this would be a question for you, since you fished all those baits. Do you feel like, since it's a plastic injection mold, that it does swim a little different or even float a little different than like the resin ones that you get from people? Like just an overall, like your overall perspective on it, like what I'm saying, because a lot of people say, it just doesn't work the same with injection mold as it does a resin mold because of the weight, whatever it might be.
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be some differences, no doubt. It's no different than if you take you can take the exact same crankbait mold and build it out of a different plastic or build it out of balsa, and it's going to react different. Because it's a different material that you're introducing to the water that's going to have different properties.
Okay.
So for me, I would say we've done a really good job of like meshing those things, right? Like a wood bait's not going to be the same. Now, what I'll say is, like, hands down, I think it's the best mass produced one.
There you go. That's what I was going to get
out
at
there.
too.
Because the reality of it is when you have a guy that's spending 12 hours on one bait and he's hand tuning everyone and moving the weight inside and getting it to perfectly suspend and all that, it's impossible. You can't do that for a big company can't do that, right? Because they have to sell thousands and thousands, not 100 of them.
Yeah.
And you can't do that. And especially you can't do that at a $35 to $38 price point.
No, not at all. Right.
And so it's hard to compare those things. And that's why I try to explain to people, like, I took all of these things that I loved about these baits and things that I was passionate about and tried to blend them the best we could into what I would consider the best all around, like, tournament or starter glide bait. Now, that doesn't mean a guy that's super hardcore can't go out there and throw it and have a blast.
Yeah.
Big ones, because it does different things, right? Like, you can burn it and it's not going to blow out on you. You can twitch it around cover and slide it underneath docks if you want. And I wanted it to be easy to use for people and to really take that mass market and push more people and get them more excited about that big bait side of things.
Do you not? So since you're traveling everywhere, do you see the trend, like, for big baits kind of coming up more on the East Coast, a little more in the Midwest and stuff? You see a little more people throwing. Yeah.
Hands down, you see it, especially more in that.
Yeah.
In that size range, right? 7.5 to 9 inch stuff. You don't see as much of the 12, 13, 14 inch stuff as much that way. And so it's definitely growing, though, right? Because I get more and more messages of people from all over sending pictures of fish that they caught on a glide, right? Whether it's all the way in the Northeast up in Maine and Connecticut and stuff.
Yeah.
Or it's down in Arizona on Saguaro or California, or, it could be Clear Lake. I get them from all over the place, even Florida and stuff. And so it continues to grow bigger and bigger. I know from fishing it, big baits all over the country, that they'll eat them all over the place. There's obviously some lakes that are better than others based on the forage and how the body of water sets up. But there's always a time and place on nearly every body of water to be able to throw a big bait.
So now, can you talk about a tournament where that bait was a game changer for you and pulled you in some big fish?
Yeah. Well, actually, it was funny. When I won on Champlain this year, like, I was super pumped about it, and at the same time, I was kind of pissed about it, because nobody's really won a major pro level event on Champlain with all smallmouth. And I really wanted to be the first guy to do it. And so I was catching smallmouth all week, and I was keeping myself in contention. And on day 3, I was on my way running back to the ramp, and I stop on one place and I pick up the Arashi Glide and I throw it out there, and I catch. It was like a 4 1/4 largemouth. And I put it on the balance beam, and I balance beam it against all the smallmouth, and my smallest smallmouth and that largemouth were they were neck and neck pretty much. And I was like, well, you get bonus points for eating the glide. So I pulled I took the largemouth away. And then, like, the next cast, I had a 6-pounder follow it. And, there's been several tournaments like that. Even Table Rock a few years ago, I made a top 10 there. and every day I would go and I would catch a bunch of fish on a jerkbait, and then I'd catch 13, 14 pounds, and I would come back down and I'd throw a glide bait, trying to catch one or two fish, and every day I would get that one big bite on a glide bait.
Yeah.
And so I've had several tournaments over my career where it definitely made a difference. I'm yet to have one where I can just lock it in my hand and just go. That's still like one of my goals, is to have a tournament set up where we're at the right place at the right time, when you can just lock an 8-inch Hud or the Rashi Glide or something in your hand and just go to work.
Did you hesitate when you first were trying to pick up a big bait during a tournament, just because it was like, man, you got to put a little work in? I don't know if it's going to work at this time. Or did you kind of know the conditions were right and you're like, I can do it?
Well, I've never hesitated in the time that I've fished on the Elite Series.
Okay.
I hesitated some in the Bass Pro Tour. I still threw it some, but it just doesn't work as well in that format.
No.
But I've grown up throwing swim baits in tournaments since I started, since the last 18 plus years. And so I always gained the confidence in it, right? Because early on, there were several tournaments where I would lock it in my hand at home and I would catch 25 pounds, and second would be 14. And so I gained a lot of confidence in those scenarios, throwing it in situations where it wasn't, your like quote unquote perfect swim bait conditions.
Yeah. Do you see other guys throughout the years in series throwing swim baits more? Rarely.
Yeah, there's some guys that mess around with it. It's still a really tough thing to commit to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because I grew up doing it for so long, it's easier for me to lock one in my hand or just say, hey, I'm going to throw this. And my mindset on it a lot of times is that if I know that there's a group of fish somewhere positioned, I typically pick the big bait up first because I feel like I'm going to catch the biggest one out of that group. And I give myself a better opportunity of doing that. And you see that starting to catch on more and more. And there's definitely parts of the country where it's catching on more and more, for sure.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's get to some of these questions. We got a decent amount. This one is from the real Tony Lamb. What is your tournament mental preparation? Or I'm sorry, pre-tournament prep. Gosh, I fucked that one up. What is your pre-tournament mental preparation? Do you have a plan? And see if conditions match up or down. You wing it and see what conditions are and build off of that. So what's your, I guess
you always try to come in with a game plan, but it is a game plan that is written in pencil and not pen, because you have to sometimes be able to erase everything. And that's why I tell people that spending the most amount of time on the water that you can in as many different scenarios as possible will only make you better, because we're all given the same amount of time on the water in a tournament. And the guy whose light bulb goes off the quickest and realizes that that's the change he needs to make or she needs to make is the one that's going to come out on top. And sometimes that can be daily, or even happen throughout the day. You may have a really good morning bite, but then you have to adjust throughout the day to, continue to catch up. And so, for me mentally, I try to do as much online research as I can so that I feel as confident as possible going into it, right? Like I have a basic understanding of the body of water and what should be happening. And then I launch my boat with an open mind, knowing that I have preconceived notions that are like putty, and I can mold that plan into whatever it needs to be based on the water.
Do you take notes as well when you're out on the water, like say for a tournament and you're there?
I don't. I take mental notes.
Mental notes.
And I should take notes. I'm not disciplined enough to sit down and like write notes. I take mental notes, but to like actually sit down and write them, I don't.
Great. This one's from a great name. This is Shit Show Joe.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I said, it looks like KVD has struggled with the MLF format as well as others. Do you see some of the other top anglers opting to come back to the Elite Series?
I think there's potential. I mean, you already saw it this year. Guys like Greg Hackney, Jason Christie, Justin Atkins. Well, this will be Atkins' first year on the Elites, but he came from FLW Tour and then went to Bass Pro Tour, and now he's coming to the Elites. But there's certain guys that will do better at one format than the other, and then there's some guys that do really well at both. And I think it's just a personal thing. I've talked to some guys that they actually enjoy it more. And then there's other guys that just mentally it doesn't jive with them the same. And so it's hard to say. I think it just kind of depends on where the momentum goes, and kind of who has that momentum of whether or not they'll sustain or not sustain.
Yeah. Okay. Great answer. This one's from Burrell Bryan. Does Lake Coeur d'Alene have the potential for a double-digit largemouth? Just curious by an Idaho guy.
Yeah, 100%. It has the potential.
Awesome.
We've got trout, we've got kokanee, so we've got the right, food base. Our biggest struggle is that we are 100% northern strain. And so for you to grow a double-digit northern strain, it's going to be at least a minimum of 16 years old, I would say. And so that's, because we've got a short growing season, they don't grow as fast, but they live longer. And so you just have to have those right genetics. There's been way too many 9 to 9.8 largemouth caught in the last few years up here that there's a 10-pounder swimming around. Like if you've got that many 9 to, just under 10-pounders, there's 10-pounders swimming around out there.
Nice. Some of these we answered on the podcast already, so I'm not going to ask them again. Big Bass Dreamin' 90. Where's the top 3 lakes in Idaho, and how long are you able to fish them from what month to what month?
Oh man, I would say Coeur d'Alene is probably one of them. Pend Oreille is another one of them. And both of those lakes you can pretty much fish year round. The backs of the bays will freeze up a little bit, but the main lake will stay 37 to 39 and you can still catch them when it gets that cold. Boat ramps can be a little tricky sometimes with snow and ice and things like that. And the third lake is, all the Idaho guys will probably hate me, but Dorshack's probably
I've dolphin noised a couple of comments on here before if you need me to do that.
Yeah, and that's there's a world record smallmouth swimming around in that place.
Wow.
It's super tough to fish, but it's a very unique body of water.
Great answer. Here's one from Rich Gostek, I think is his name. Have you ever had an encounter with locals during a tournament, and how did it go down?
Oh, I've had a few, I would say, like over the years. Some stuff that, like, when you look at it unfold, you almost feel sorry for the person in, like,
And on top of
just
that,
in the way that
they
they're
don't know
acting.
you. They don't know you, so they don't know that you wrestle. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
true.
Like, that's a whole nother thing.
I would say very rarely do I run into a situation where a guy is just purposely, like, causing issues. Generally, the situations I run into with locals on the water and stuff, most of the time they don't know. And so I always approach it that way, right? Like, when I come into a situation, I want to fish a spot or I want to fish something, and I see somebody there. My first instinct isn't like, I own this place and you need to leave. I come in with the approach of like, hey, we've got a big tournament. Do you mind if I fish in here? I've been fishing here the last couple of days. 9 times out of 10, people are super cool, and they'll pick up, they'll watch. But then there's always that occasional person that is like, screw you. I was here. I've been fishing here for 40 years, and I don't care if you got $100,000 on the line or not. I'm catching dinner. And like, it's one of those things where that's part of what we deal with, and I just embrace it.
That's a good positive thing too, because I mean,
it's not always the most ideal. Like I've had situations where I've had that, and I've had to just take a step back and tell myself, like, this is not the only place to catch a bass right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that allows you, if you know that going into an event, then it allows you to also build that plan B and plan C if those things happen.
Which that could really throw you off during a tournament, right? I mean, if someone was like, "You're not fishing."
Oh yeah, I've watched guys where that literally just eliminates them out of the event.
Oh, that's horrible.
Because mentally, it just totally jacks them up. Now, I've also seen times where, unfortunately, that has probably cost some guys, whether it was a win or a check or something like that. But you kind of have to embrace it and say that's why we love this sport, right? It's like, we don't play on a controlled environment. We don't have a perfectly mowed grass and all of these things. But
no, not
you
at
just
all.
have to embrace it.
All right, that's a great answer. This guy, I think, seems like he might know you. This is a great question too, because this comes back to the shit in your pants story that I asked you if you ever did that. It says, I think it's Sea Ghost. Ask him if he ever came home missing a sock and what he ate before he lost his sock.
See, okay, so I saw that one on the post, and I was so confused by it.
You've never had to wipe your ass with a sock, dude? I have.
No,
I mean, you're a hunter. You hunt, right? I mean, you're out there in the woods, man, right?
Yeah, but I love a good pair of socks. I'd go like a t-shirt sleeve before a pair of socks.
Oh shit!
I think I would even ditch my underwear before I ditch one of my socks.
I think you're right. That's a great answer. I'll ditch the underwear first. Let's see. This one is, this is CJL Fishing. What do you do in the off season to prepare yourself for the next season? Do you do a lot of studying, or do you just go out and fish and learn about the transitions and where they are at certain types of year? Thanks, Brandon.
So I do a fair amount of research, especially if it's a place that I haven't been. If it's a body of water that I've been to a fair amount of times at a time of year that we've been there, then I at least generally have an idea of what stage those fish should be in, and then I pay attention to what the weather is doing in those places, because a lot of times we fish in places during a transitional time of year. Well, really, every single day, bass are in transition, either going to or from the spawn, and they just make that circle.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always try to have that game plan, like we talked about before. Do that online research. The off season is the time that we renegotiate contracts, come up with marketing game plans with the companies we work with. Currently, like most of the day today, I was doing emails, and then I jumped in and I was working on rigging my boat because some more of the stuff that showed up for my new Skeeter showed up.
Nice.
And so it's kind of just like an ongoing process of prepping for the next year, right? Getting our RV packed, and then trying to see family that you haven't seen in 5 or 6 months, and see your friends at home, and try to get some of that done as well.
Here's a question for you from me. Do you have a manager that deals with all of your sponsors and stuff?
I do not. So
I only ask because I'm horrible at it myself. I don't like dealing with it, so I'd rather not deal with it if I don't have to, because I'm a pushover. So I mean, so I'm wondering, do you have someone? Because you seem like you're the same kind of like whatever, kind of thing.
I do everything on my own.
Uh-huh.
Tiff helps out a lot on the like day-to-day type of stuff. But when it comes to like sponsorship and things like that, she'll organize all the contracts in a nice folder and make sure I'm on top of everything. But when it comes to negotiating or working with new sponsors, I do that all. I prefer to build that friendship and that relationship with the people that I work with, and make it enjoyable, because I don't, at the end of the day, when times get tough and they are looking at it, and if they have to start making cuts and cutting people, I want them to have to call me personally, not
change their mind too, right? I mean, that could change their mind and go, you know what? We talked to him. Let's give him a call. Maybe they go, we like this guy's actually has a relationship with us. You feel like that's something that's untouched as well, like the fishing industry. Like another thing about it, part of being a pro is learning how to deal with sponsors. And like, I'm sure you get dudes that jump from company to company every other year, which might not be a good, look sometimes, but who knows? I don't know. That's like something that needs to be learned as well, right?
Yeah, I would say when it comes to sponsorships and the business side, the fishing world is definitely different than, I can't say any other sport because I haven't dealt with it in all the other sports, but in most of your major mainstream sports, it's different because their agents and stuff are like negotiating team contracts and things like that, of like who essentially is going to own you.
Yeah.
And then they also do their endorsement contracts. So those endorsement deals are usually like, here's a bunch of money to film a commercial and you're going to be the spokesperson for it. And that's it, right? Like they're kind of, a lot of times they're one-off deals and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But in the fishing world, it's so much more of a smaller group of people who make the decision within those companies. Right? They're not there's some big corporations in the fishing world, but they're not the size of like the Nikes and the Gatorades and like, these massive global companies. And so that process of like building that relationship to me is a lot more important, because just like I don't like to be considered just a number on a P&L at the end of the year. Like I also want them to feel the same way, right? Like that I'm not just a number.
Yeah.
and that I'm not just like a marketing expense on their budget, right? Like I want them to look at it and be like, this is well worth what we're paying him. We're not paying him just to sell, but actually getting, he believes in the product, he uses it, we enjoy being around him. Like that, all of that stuff comes into play.
Did someone show you that, like your dad or like someone you looked up to in the fishing industry, kind of show you the ropes a little bit?
Not really. I think a lot of it was just stuff that I had learned over the years of just getting in situations and like, I don't really like the way that went down.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it comes down to just being a good person. I think a lot of people forget that. Like one of my things is I'm always people over profit.
What do you mean by people over profit?
Like choose people first versus like making more money. Okay. And that's one of my, I'm the type of person that I'm not willing to like cut corners and do things less just to try to make a little bit more money. Kind of goes like earlier I was talking about, like, don't sell yourself, sell your soul or anything like that. It's kind of that same principle. And a lot of the way that I make my decisions on the companies that I'm going to work with are based off of that simple principle. Like I want them to also have a lot of that same philosophy. And that's where you run into the difference between like I would say the fishing industry as a whole is much more that way than like a major corporation.
Yeah.
Where they're making decisions, pinching pennies, doing these different things. And it to me, like if it takes away from the consumer to save you a little bit of money, it's not worth it in the long run. It's worth it in the short game, but in the long game, you lose every time.
And also, like, it's got to be hard sometimes if you're using something you don't believe in. You know what I'm saying? Like
for me, it's literally impossible. It just doesn't happen.
Like I've had a couple people, like I barely am starting to get sponsored with the podcast. And before I kind of had a couple companies go, hey, we want to work with you. And I'm kind of like, that's not me though. People are going to know that's not me when I say this, you know, like it's a hard one for sure. I mean,
and it's a balancing thing, right? Because there's the other side of the coin of like when a guy's starting out and you literally don't have any money and someone's like, hey, we'll give you $5,000 and you've got $100 in your bank account. You're like, okay. And then, and you know, I don't look down on anybody or anything for making those decisions because at the end of the day, you also still have to make money, right? Like I also have a very love-hate relationship with money because I love the things that it allows me to be able to do. I have no attachment to money itself.
Mm-hmm.
I love the things it allows me to do, right? Like to be able to fish for a living, to pay entry fees. And I think there's too many people that get worried about just the money side of it.
Yeah.
But you, at the end of the day, like you also are a business, right? Like a professional angler is your own small business and you need to run it that way. And you need to be profitable to sustain, just like those companies do. And I think if guys take that approach and things are out there on the table and you're working together, then there's really not any issues then. right? And the place where you run into issues is where like there's not a good line of communication of what somebody's paying, like the deliverable, I guess, on both ends.
Yes. Because I'm sure it could come up short with the angler as well. I mean, when they expect someone to promote something, and it just doesn't come through, and they never put up anything. Especially social media plays into it now. You got to post a certain amount for that company, even. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, do you tie your YouTube? Do you tie your YouTube into it as well? Like when you go for a sponsorship, or is the YouTube its own deal?
I've tried to keep it separate.
It's a good idea.
And really, I mean, the thing is from a monetary standpoint, I keep it separate. But at the same time, it undoubtedly adds value. Mm-hmm. It can't not add value because it's more eyeballs on products, logos, all of that. Right? A lot of times it's eyeballs that they wouldn't get otherwise. And so even if somebody's not paying for that, they're essentially just getting it as a bonus, right? Because some of my contracts are the same as they were before I started the YouTube, but they're getting, over the course of a year, they're getting whatever. I don't even know what the numbers are. And I just looked at it the other day and I can't remember. They're getting like millions and millions, right? Like upwards of 10 million plus more impressions, but they're paying the same amount of money.
And that's just because you're already sponsored and you're in the video at a tournament. You got everything on already, so it really doesn't. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, it's essentially just a bonus. And I've sold sponsorship deals for that before. I had Go RVing sponsored it a couple years. And I've been talking to a couple companies lately about potentially sponsoring it again. And so I try to keep it separate, but we're filming the tournament, and so it's kind of all tied together. And then if a sponsor, and then I use a lot of the content from that to promote those sponsors. So because it's my life, it's all just tied into one anyways. But but I do negotiate separate deals based on that.
That's nice. Perfect answer for me.
Yeah.
What is your favorite bait for extremely stained water in the dead of summer? That's Japanese bass, man.
For me, it would probably be like a Storm Arashi Square 3 or Square 5 crankbait. Summertime, dirty water. If you can find a little bit of current, or even if you can find shade lines and things like that, you'll have some shallow fish. And a lot of times you can get those fish to react by cranking them. So if you got lay downs or rip wrap, sometimes it could be natural rock and things like that. That's usually going to be my go-to for dirtier water.
This one from Big Bass Ron V. What's better, bass fishing or elk hunting?
They are beautiful in their own ways. Bass fishing is definitely my number one passion. But hunting for me it's more of the experience and kind of a soul reset for me every year. I love getting out in the backcountry where my cell phone doesn't work and electronics don't work, and you're just out there. And for me, it's just on a personal, mental level, it's a good reset.
Yeah,
for me.
Makes sense. You got to do something different.
The adventure side of it, for me, is what I love.
Great. This one's from Stray Rat Swim Baits. What is your go-to big bait non-injected plastic?
Oh, man. I like the last couple of years, I haven't thrown much other than the Arashi glide, but I mean, like a depth 250 is phenomenal.
Really?
It's a great bait. I love throwing like a hinkle shad.
Yeah.
And I've caught fish on that all over the country. Those are probably a couple of my favorite ones.
Perfect.
That are non-injected, I guess.
Yeah, perfect answer. This one is from OU812. Favorite pro to be staying camping with while on the trail? Who's the best pro to drink a beer with?
I love me some Chad Pipkin. Chad, he roomed with us in our camper for several years. Actually, all the way up till I went to the Bass Pro Tour. That was one of the hardest parts. Was like he was staying and I was leaving, and he's probably one of, if not the most positive person that I've ever been around. And honestly, when I won AOI in 2017, like he was a big part of that, because I would finish in like 20th and be pissed off about some fish I lost, and he would finish in 60th and have a better attitude than I did. And so I constantly learned from him.
Yeah.
And he's always positive, he's always happy. And he's a great angler and just one of those people that's easy to be around. And just I love hanging out with that guy.
Nice. This one's a good question. What is your 2020 electronics setup? Do you think there will be restrictions put on electronics in the future by professional leagues? Jordan Bradley.
So on my new FXR, I'm going to run 2 Humminbird Solix 12 at the console. And I'll run, usually my left one, I run on either full map or map in 2D. Mm-hmm. And then the right graph, I run split screen between side imaging and down imaging. And then up front, I'm running 3 Humminbird Solix 12. Damn. And I'm going to have one for Mega 360 and then one for Mega Live. And then another one for my mapping and my 2D sonar.
Damn. You got it all.
So it's going to be a lot. But for me, there's times and places for all of those things and their tools. And I don't know that the leagues would ever limit electronics. But I say that just based off of what we currently have.
Yes.
Now, if all of a sudden, somehow down the future, we come out with technology, you put a pair of sunglasses on and the water disappears and you're just looking around and there's bass swimming around and you can see them everywhere. I mean, yeah, they probably would have limit that to an extent, but in the current state that we are now, there's still too many variables in a tournament situation over a 4-day event that even if you have the best electronics, if you don't understand how to use them or understand the basic knowledge of fish movements and seasonal patterns, at the end of the day, you're still not going to win. It just allows us to do those things better than we did without that technology.
It's just another tool, pretty much, correct? I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Great answer.
Here's the best way to put it. Before, a long time ago, not that long ago, we used to handwrite letters, hand them to a dude. He hopped on a horse, rode his horse across the country, stuck that on someone else's doorstep, and then rode back. And now we type on our computer and push a button, and it sends it anywhere in the world.
That's the truth. It's the truth.
So, I mean, it's like you're still doing the same job. It makes it a little bit easier. Now, granted, that's probably not the best analogy, but that's kind of the thing. Like, you're still doing the same thing. Technology just helps you do it a little easier.
Yeah, yeah. This is from Purdy Mouth Co. With Arashi Glide being such a successful bait and Brand's passion for big swim baits, could we ever see a bigger version of the Glide, or does he have any more ideas for swim baits to Storm?
So we have a 3-piece bait that we call the Swimmer. Okay. We got the Glide and the Swimmer, and that was, again, just kind of based off of things that I liked in other baits, but tried to fix places where I felt like they failed. Right, I wanted a 3-piece bait that I could burn as fast as I could physically turn my hands and not blow out.
Yeah,
and that was my number one thing with that, and that's what we created. I also wanted one that had some head movement, that wasn't just a still, front section and then just the tail kicking behind it. I wanted head movement in it as well. And so we tried to build that a little bit different. And I would love to build a 9.5 inch version of the Arashi Glide. I would love to build a bigger Arashi top walker, like our big walking bait. We've got a size 13. I would love to build like a 18 or a 19 or something. But the tricky part is, right, like we were talking about, bigger companies mass producing baits versus a guy building them in his garage.
Yes.
The tricky part is that for them to produce a bait and put the money and the marketing and stuff behind it and the logistics of shipping and all of that, and just the time of mold costs and everything, it takes their bottom line to break even is much, much higher than the guy building them in his garage.
Yeah.
And so they have to sell a lot more baits, and the bigger you go, the less baits you're going to sell.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the nature of the beast. There's no way around that. Like, the bigger you go, the less baits you're going to sell because there's just not as many people doing it. That doesn't mean that they won't do it. If you would have asked me 8 years ago, I would have never thought that they would have built a glide bait.
Yeah.
So I think that since we've already got the baseline, there's a possibility. And I think the more successful that swim bait category of theirs is, the better the odds of a bigger bait happening.
Great answer.
So if somebody really wants a bigger bait, they need to just make sure that them and all their buddies and all their buddies' buddies are buying them.
Right. This is the last one. This one is pre-spawn bass in Florida. Big cold front comes through and the notoriously tough bite happens. Do you fish painfully slow with the soft plastic, or try to force a reaction bite with a hard bait like a trap or jerk bait? Cold front Florida bass have me stumped. That's from my buddy from Tennessee.
I put the skeeter on the trailer, pack up the RV, and I roll my ass out of Florida. Just kidding. That's really what I'd like to do sometimes. Florida fish they're the most finicky, and Florida strain bass actually in Florida are even worse. And it's just because they don't deal with it as often, right? It's something that is out of their norm to get a major cold front. They just don't see that most of the year. They're used to sunshine, hot temperatures, and so it takes them out of their comfort zone. And I struggle with this even when I know what I need to do. I struggle with it. And Florida is one of those things where if you know there are bass in an area, you have to just downsize and slow down. You just have to do it. I've tried to go against the grain a bunch of times, and it doesn't work most of the time. I've shot myself in the foot, and it's one of those things where in Florida, there's going to be certain sections of a lake or a river that have a better population of fish, and you need to put yourself in those areas and just lock down and slow down when those cold fronts come.
Great answer. Great answer. I want to say thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah.
Thank you. You've been a great phone interview, man. Do you want to plug any sponsors or anything like that? I mean, you're the big swinging dick over here. You don't need to.
If anybody wants to look up, I'm not going to just list off a bunch of sponsors.
Or anything you want to promote, maybe your YouTube channel, something cool like that.
Yeah,
I like that a lot.
If people want to know where to find me or stuff, I mean, the easiest thing to do is just go to my website. It's bmpfishing.com.
Mm-hmm.
Those are just my initials. I get asked that all the time. What does BMP stand for? It's just my initials. So, but there you can find, we've got merch on there. You can find the YouTube videos, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that. And that's the easiest place to just, find the sponsors I'm working with. And then the YouTube channel is also just BMP Fishing. So, that's where if you actually want to learn what I do and everything, if someone hasn't watched, that's the best place to go do it.
Great, man. I appreciate you coming on again. Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully we can do a in-person one sometime.
Yeah, that'd be great if you ever come down this way, man. I'm always open.
Okay, awesome. I appreciate it.